This video serves as an introduction to nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication is an extremely important form of interpersonal communication. People who are seen as extremely competent in nonverbal communication are usually seen as very adept interpersonal communicators, and they are often seen in a very positive light and as very accomplished, self-confident, and assertive types of people. Being good at nonverbal communication usually means that you are able to express yourself clearly and accurately, but you are also able to interpret other people's messages, their feelings, and their moods much more accurately. Why might that matter? Because the better you are at not only encoding and decoding nonverbal communication, but the better that you are able to build and maintain relationships. So what I'd like for us to do, as we have with the previous videos, is look at some of the principles of nonverbal communication. For nonverbal communication, there are 6 of them. I'm going to run through these pretty quickly because they're repeated throughout the chapter, but I want to make sure that you understand them. So the first principle is going to be that nonverbal messages interact with verbal messages. That means that verbal messages and nonverbal messages do not exist alone. Okay, that they work in unison with one another, whether we want them to or not. So, a few of the ways in which nonverbal messages interact with verbal messages is that they accent meaning. So if you start talking more loudly, that is going to show that you have some force behind the words that you're saying, so that becomes an accent. If you hit the desk because you're trying to make a point when you're hitting the desk, that accents that this is an important point for you. We can talk about complimenting. We can talk about how nonverbal messages complement our verbal messages. We can talk about how our nonverbal messages contradict our verbal messages, and I will say that contradictory nonverbal messages are usually believed over verbal messages. And that's because people think of our nonverbal messages as happening automatically, something that we don't think about or control. Nonverbal messages can control verbal messages, and nonverbal messages can repeat. Nonverbal messages can repeat verbal messages, and nonverbal messages can substitute for verbal messages. So, again, think about, instead of saying timeout, you just kind of do this. We all know that that is the sign for timeout, and so it substitutes for it. The second principle is that nonverbal messages help manage impressions. We form impressions based on nonverbal communication. We form it based on, does somebody look confident? We might even base it on how they're dressed. Okay, you might ask yourself ways in which you judge other people based on the way that they look. All right, what are the ways in which you try to manage how other people evaluate or judge you right off the bat? Okay, it's not all just in what we say, but it's also how we present ourselves. The third is nonverbal messages help form relationships. Nonverbal communication sends relationship messages such as affection, support, displeasure, anger. We use nonverbal messages to communicate friendship and the nature of our friendships. So start thinking about, how do you communicate affection or support or displeasure or anger, as I said before. Who do you hold hands with? Do you hold hands with your friends? Do you hold hands with your intimate others? This is going to vary by culture, of course. How do you look when you're angry? Does the little vein in your forehead start throbbing? Do you scrunch up your face? Do you sneer? All of these are nonverbal communication forms that show us relationships and relationship status. Nonverbal messages structure conversation. So we use our nonverbal communication in order to proceed through a conversation. So in the United States, oftentimes when we are in a conversation with somebody and the listener is ready to respond or speak, a lot of times we lean forward and open our mouths a little bit. This lets the listener know, or the speaker know, that we're ready to interject. We maintain eye contact. We change our posture. We nod our head. Right? All of these are ways in which we control our conversation. Sometimes we use kind of hand signals. Heck, we could talk about classrooms and students raising their hand. This is a way to tell the professor that, you know, we want you to stop lecturing so that we can ask questions or we have something to contribute to what you're saying. Nonverbal messages can influence and deceive is another principle. Again, nonverbal messages influence others, and obviously they can deceive others as well. Deception can be very tricky with nonverbal communication. Some people are good at it, other people are not very good at it, but you can kind of look this section over in your text a little more closely. Nonverbal messages are crucial for expressing emotion. We express our emotion through nonverbal communication, mostly through our facial expressions. By looking sad, by looking happy, by looking angry. We also can display emotion through our posture. Do you look relaxed? Do you look tense? Are you making eye contact? Are you not making eye contact? Okay, and again, we can try to hide our emotions as well. So sometimes we smile even though we're sad. It becomes hard. I mean, my grandmother would always say, "Well, your smile's not reaching your eyes," right? So some people are better at it than others. But again, these are a few ways in which nonverbal messages are used for expressing emotion. Now, there's a big chunk of the chapter has to do with the channels of nonverbal messages. Okay, and these channels of nonverbal messages are very, very important. I am not going to go through all of these. I'm just going to highlight a few of them, and it's because there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think there's 10 of them in this book. Some books have 11 of them. I'm just going to go through a couple of them, and then you can read through the rest on your own. The first has to do with body gestures. Okay, when we're talking about body gestures, we are talking about emblems, illustrators, effect displays, regulators, and adapters. Okay, and under adapters, there's three different subtypes of adapters. When we're talking about emblems, we are talking mainly about symbols, nonverbal messages that stand in place of verbal messages. So before, when I used the example of the timeout, so when you use timeout instead of saying timeout, that becomes an emblem. When we talk about illustrators, we could be talking more about, the fish is this big. Okay, so my hands are showing, okay, or illustrating what my words are saying. Effect displays, these are going to be nonverbal gestures that display emotions. Again, mainly this is going to happen through the face. Okay, these are going to be facial expressions. As you've noticed after watching a few of my videos, I have all sorts of facial expressions. I have very expressive eyes. I don't mean to roll my eyes and look around. I just do it a lot. I catch myself making all sorts of strange faces. There are regulators. We use regulators for lots of different reasons. Regulators are the behaviors that help to monitor and coordinate and maintain the speaking with another individual. So again, leaning forward, eye contact, raising your hands, all of these kind of things help to regulate conversation. The last part of body gestures has to do with adapters. Adapters are gestures that satisfy some personal need. Okay, and so again, you can look over what these three different subtypes of adapters are on your own. In your book, some of the other types of channels of nonverbal messages are body appearance, facial messages, eye messages, sometimes called oculesics, spatial messages, artifactual messages, so the stuff that we're wearing, our clothing, our jewelry. We could talk about tattoos and piercings as well. There are touch messages, right? So there's different kinds of touch. Think about it this way. You would want your doctor to touch you in a much different way than, say, you might want your boyfriend or girlfriend to touch you, because it would just become really, really creepy. Silence becomes another form of nonverbal communication. Silence can convey lots of different messages. It can convey importance, it can convey dismay, it can convey anger, it can convey distrust, all sorts of things. And then there's also time messages, oftentimes called chronemics. So again, when I ask students, how long will you wait for a professor to show up to a classroom? You all seem to have some kind of arbitrary number of minutes when all of a sudden it's like, well, the professor's not here, so we can all leave. Some places are like 10 minutes, some places are like 15 minutes, some places are like 5 minutes, but this becomes kind of a campus urban legend type thing. There is no real rule about these things. It's just how long you're willing to wait. We can compare how long students are willing to wait for a professor versus how long they're willing to wait for a teaching assistant. The teaching assistant has a lot less time, okay, and students are far more likely to wait for a professor. Okay. So these become some of the very important messages, some of the very important forms of nonverbal communication that we need to keep in mind. In order to be competent in nonverbal communication, we need to be mindful of a couple of things. First, be mindful of what that your nonverbal communication is conveying to other people, right? Also, be aware of what other people's nonverbal communication is conveying to you. You want to make sure that you're observing effective nonverbal messages, and you want to make sure that you are taking time and thinking about how you encode and decode your messages with care.